everyone, and welcome to what is actually the first ever episode of Ravade Reads. As you can tell from this intro, I will be talking about a Marvel comic, but before I do that, I think I should tell you what this series is about, even though I made an announcement and already have the description of the series in the video description. But Ravade Reads is the series where I'll be talking about certain comics. I won't actually be reading them to you, telling you who made them, what happens, what I like and don't like, and whether or not I think you should check it out yourself. So without further ado, the comic series I will be starting today will be Daredevil Yellow. This 6-book series was written by Jeff Loeb and drawn by Tim Sale, who are frequent collaborators and have worked together on books like Batman: The Long Halloween. This is the first series in a set of books that have been dubbed the Marvel Colors series, although I don't think there actually is an official name for it. So this whole set of books, the Marvel Colors series, features Marvel characters dealing with the loss of a loved one, contrasted with how those characters first met, and this is further shown in the art by having the designs change. So in this case, Daredevil wears his traditional red suit during the modern day stuff, and wears his original yellow and red suit during the past events, which is why this book is called Daredevil Yellow. Let's start off with book 1, titled The Championship Season. The story begins with Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, visiting his father's old gym where he used to box, while we hear the letter that he is writing to Karen Page in the narration boxes, the woman he loved who recently died. His friend and law partner Foggy suggested that he do that to get his feelings out after her death. We then flash back to Matt and Foggy in their college days, while Matt already having his enhanced senses, which he gained during an accident in his childhood, which, gives him all his Daredevil powers, and more on that when we actually see his origin. At this point, his father is at the height of his career, but after refusing to throw a fight, he is murdered by his manager. Those who murdered his father are not convicted, and Matt and Foggy graduate law school. After the graduation, though, Matt goes back to his apartment, creating his first ever Daredevil costume to take on those he thinks the system won't be able to stop. For a first issue, I thought this was just okay. If you already know Daredevil, you know exactly where the story is headed, but if you don't know anything about him, it could have done a better job explaining things like how he gets his powers and all that. However, this is, the first in a set of 6 books, so I can't really judge it all here. I know the art isn't for everyone, but I actually liked it and the use of colors. For example, how in the beginning, pretty much the only color comes from the red on his suit, but then once it goes to the flashbacks, it's an explosion of color, for example, his college dorm being entirely yellow. So yeah, that's it for book 1. It's time to move on to book 2, titled The Measure of a Man. This issue begins with Matt continuing his letter to Karen while flashing back to him hunting down his father's killers as Daredevil. He hunts down the man who ordered the murder, nicknamed the Fixer, until he dies in a subway from a heart attack. When the police question him about what happens, he tells them to call him Daredevil, a name bullies used to mock him as a child. Meanwhile, Foggy searches for a secretary for their law firm, Nelson and Murdock. After many failed attempts, Foggy finally hires someone, and when Matt returns to the office to see who they hired, it's none other than Karen Page. This issue certainly went by much faster and had a little bit more action to it. We get some more insight into Daredevil himself, such as how he gets his name and the fact that Karen was the first person to ever call him the Man Without Fear, which is his signature description. Let's continue with Book 3, Stepping into the Ring. Matt continues his letter to Karen, the now deceased love of his life, as he recalls their first ever clients at the Nelson and Murdock law firm, who happen to be none other than the Fantastic Four, who make a little cameo at the beginning. To celebrate this, Matt, Foggy, and Karen head down to a bar that Matt and Foggy used to frequent in their college days, and this is the beginning of the love story aspect of the series between Matt and Karen. While there's a group of people making Helen Keller jokes at him, in which he responds by recounting all of the Helen Keller jokes he's heard before, on top of beating them at pool. After Foggy and Karen leave, the group tries to attack Matt, but he stops them and escapes. Matt visits Slade in prison, the man who pulled the trigger on his father. He tries to get more information out of him about the people that he works for, but is unsuccessful. Sometime after, a woman named Grace comes to Nelson and Murdock, claiming she has done some wrongdoing against her husband, but leaves in a hurry before they could really ask what happened. Afterward, that man comes back asking for their services, and he is none other than obscure Marvel villain, the Owl. Sorry for that horrifying picture of him there, but like I said, I'm trying to avoid any copyright things. I certainly think this issue was better than the previous 2, and that this story is actually picking up some momentum. The love story between Karen and Matt has begun, and it seems that the Owl is being set up as an important villain, which I don't actually know if he will be, since this is the first time I'm reading this series, which I feel like I should have mentioned. Another thing that I like about this series so far that I haven't brought up is the old school 60s aesthetic in things like the dialogue, the fashion, etc. It brings a very classic feel to this early 2000s series. Now it's time for book 4, Never Lead with Your Left. In Matt's letter to Karen, he writes of a time he went to visit Mr. Fantastic at the Baxter building regarding their legal matters, but instead he finds Electro, who he follows and takes down. Since he started off simply going after the people who killed his father, he's begun to make a name for himself as Daredevil. At Nelson and Murdock, Foggy is practicing his case regarding the owl when Karen sees Daredevil swing by. Matt, who obviously changed back to his normal clothes, comes in wondering what all the commotion was about. It's clear that Karen knows a lot about Daredevil from newspapers like the Daily Bugle, and while the three are talking, they decide to go out bowling. While out bowling, the fact that Karen and Matt like each other becomes even more apparent, which will definitely cause some problems with Foggy, who also has a crush on her. A short time after they went bowling, Matt attended Slade's execution in prison. He thought he would get some sort of relief from it, but he didn't. He then returns to his apartment, which happens to be his father's old apartment, because he still wants to hang on to that memory of him. The issue ends with Matt and Foggy talking at Nelson and Murdock, where Foggy confides in Matt that he plans on asking Karen to marry him. What? So I was actually liking this issue up until the end. Daredevil's making a name for himself, the owl is being set up as a villain, Matt and Karen's relationship is growing, and the man who killed Jack Murdock is dead. But that final line just makes zero sense to me. Why on earth would Foggy ask this person that he's only sort of friends with, that he's only known for a short while, to marry him? What does he think will happen? And now we have Book 5, Against the Ropes. In Matt's letter, he begins to come to terms with Karen's death, while in the past it picks up shortly after the end of the last issue, where Karen was sent out to deliver some papers to their client, the Owl, but she never returned, prompting Daredevil to search the city for her. Daredevil frees Karen from the Owl, the first time the two have ever met this way, when the Owl literally swoops in and attacks him. The fight leads out to the harbor, where the Owl seemingly drowns and Daredevil makes it back to shore. However, the Owl did in fact survive and was taken by the police. The issue ends with Foggy returning to Nelson and Murdock to bring flowers to Karen and seemingly propose like he said he would at the end of the last book, but he sees Matt and Karen flirting with each other. As they continue, Foggy leaves before he's seen dumping the flowers in a trash can. I'm surprised the whole asking Karen to marry me thing from Foggy wasn't really followed up on, but I still like the issue. One thing that stands out to me about this story is that it's almost like an ode to classic Daredevil. I've already talked about his design and the story's 60s aesthetics, but its tone is mostly lighthearted and represents a much less dark time in the character's history. With only one issue left though, I'm not really sure where the story is going to go. It kind of just feels like things just got started. Well, that's not actually the case, because here I am with the finale, Book 6, The Final Bell. The book begins with Matt's final letter to Karen, as he is beginning to feel the ability to let her go and move on. In the past, Daredevil's reputation as a superhero is increasing, as well as Foggy's anger, especially now that they've become the court-appointed attorneys of Zebediah Kilgrave, aka the Purple Man, who you may know as the main villain of Jessica Jones. Karen goes with Matt up to the jail to meet the Purple Man, but he uses his mind control powers to free himself and take Karen hostage. Daredevil tracks him down and saves Karen, who actually gives him the inspiration to make his costume red because that's her favorite color. At Nelson and Murdock, Foggy tells Matt that he can't hate him anymore and lets go of the idea of being with Karen. That's when she actually comes in to tell him that she's going on a date with Daredevil that night. In the present, Matt finishes his letter telling Karen that he fixed up Fogwell's gym as a way to honor his father, that he finally forgives himself for not being able to save her, and that he will always love her. This issue was, a good conclusion. Karen and Matt, as Daredevil, finally went on a date with each other. Foggy stopped being annoying, and in the present, Matt finally begins to move on. As for my thoughts on the series as a whole, I think it is far from the best Daredevil story, but it's still a good little series nonetheless. It does a good job highlighting the classic, more lighthearted period of the character. However, some drawbacks for me was the fact that it kind of felt that the story was taking a while to get going, despite it being a short series, and the love triangle aspect didn't add anything, nor did it go anywhere. I also wish they covered how Matt got his powers and how Karen died, but I suppose those two things aren't necessary for this story and can be found elsewhere. Do I recommend this series? Sure. If you like Daredevil at all, why not look it up, especially since it's short, and if you only know him for his dark stuff, this is a pretty different take on the character, especially compared to nowadays. But yeah, that's Daredevil Yellow finished. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see y'all next time when I start the next part in this Marvel Color series, which happens to be Spider-Man Blue. Thank you all for watching. Goodbye.